in light of such dissent and with secession being voiced in different regions of the country. Notably in East Pakistan and the Northwest Frontier Province, on October 7, 1958, Mirza proclaimed the 1956 constitution abrogated, closed the national and provincial assemblies, and banned all political party activity. He declared that the country was under martial law and that General Muhammad Ayub Khan had been made chief martial law administrator. Mirza claimed that it was his intention to lift martial law as soon as possible and that a new constitution would be drafted. And on October 27 he swore in a new cabinet, naming Ayub Khan prime minister, while 3 lieutenant generals were given ministerial posts. The 8 civilian members in the cabinet included businessmen and lawyers, one being a young newcomer, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, a powerful landlord from Sindh province. However, Ayub Khan viewed his being named Prime Minister as the president's attempt to end his military career and ultimately to force him into oblivion. Clearly, the country could not afford 2 paramount rulers at the same time. Therefore, if one had to go, Ayub Khan decided that it should be Mirza. On the evening of October 27, Ayub Khan's senior generals presented Mirza with an ultimatum of facing permanent exile or prosecution by a military tribunal. Mirza immediately left for London, never again to return to Pakistan. Soon thereafter, Ayub Khan, who now assumed the rank of Field Marshal, proclaimed his assumption of the presidency. Martial law lasted 44 months. During that time, a number of army officers took over vital civil service posts. Many politicians were excluded from public life under an electoral body's disqualification order. A similar purge took place among civil servants. Yet, Ayub Khan argued that Pakistan was not yet ready for a full-blown experiment in parliamentary democracy and that the country required a period of tutelage and honest government before a new constitutional system could be established. He therefore initiated a plan for basic democracies, consisting of rural and urban councils directly elected by the people that would be concerned with local governance and would assist in programs of grassroots development. Elections took place in January 1960, and the Basic Democrats, as they became known, were at once asked to endorse and thus legitimate Ayub Khan's presidency. Of the 80,000 Basic Democrats, 75,283 affirmed their support. Basic democracies was a tiered system inextricably linked to the bureaucracy, and the Basic Democrats occupied the lowest rung of a ladder that was connected to the country's administrative subdistricts, tehsils, or tahsils, districts, and divisions. It was soon clear that the real power in the system resided in the bureaucrats who had dominated decision-making since colonial times. Nevertheless, the Basic Democracies system was linked to a public works program that was sponsored by the United States. The combined effort was meant to confer responsibility for village and municipal development to the local population. Self-reliance was the watchword of the overall program, and Ayub Khan and his advisors, as well as important donor countries, believed the arrangement would provide material benefits and possibly even expose people to self-governing experiences. Ayub Khan also established a constitutional commission to advise on a form of government more appropriate to the country's political culture, and his regime introduced a number of reforms. Not the least of these was the Muslim Family Laws Ordinance of 1961, which restricted polygamy and provided more rights and protection for women. He also authorized the development of family planning programs that were aimed at tackling the dilemma of Pakistan's growing population. Such actions angered the more conservative and religiously disposed members of society, who also swelled the ranks of the opposition. Under pressure to make amends and to placate the guardians of Islamic tradition, the family planning program was eventually scrapped. An important feature of the Ayub Khan regime was the quickening pace of economic growth. During the initial phase of independence, the annual growth rate was less than 3%, and that was scarcely ahead of the rate of population growth. Just prior to the military coup, the rate of growth was even smaller. During the Ayub Khan era, with assistance from external sources, notably the United States, the country accelerated economic growth, and by 1965 it had advanced to more than 6% per annum. Development was particularly vigorous in the manufacturing sector, but considerable attention was also given to agriculture. U.S. assistance was especially prominent in combating waterlogging and salinity problems that resulted from irrigation in the more vital growing zones. Moreover, plans were implemented that launched the Green Revolution in Pakistan, and new hybrid wheat and rice varieties were introduced with the goal of increasing yields. Despite positive economic developments, overall, most investment was directed toward West Pakistan, and the divisions between East and West grew during this period. Ayub Khan attempted to answer Bengali fears of becoming second-class citizens when, after work was begun, at his order on building a new Pakistan capital at Islamabad, he declared it was his intention to build a second, or legislative, capital near Dhaka, in East Pakistan. However, the start of construction on the new second capital did not placate the Bengalis, who were angered by Ayub Khan's abrogation of the 1956 constitution, his failure to hold national elections, and the decision to sustain martial law. East Pakistanis had many grievances, and in no instance did they genuinely believe their purposes and concerns could be served under Ayub Khan's military government. Subsequent developments only served to enforce these beliefs. Water rights agreements signed with India and hydroelectric projects along the Indus River benefited the West, as did military agreements reached with the United States. The Pakistani officer class was largely from West Pakistan, and all the key army and air installations were located there. Even in the case of naval capability, Karachi was a far more formidable base of operations than Chittagong in East Pakistan. In 1962, Ayub Khan promulgated another constitution. Presidential rather than parliamentary in focus, it was based on an indirectly elected president and a reinforced centralized political system that emphasized the country's viceregal tradition. Although Ayub anticipated launching the new political system without political parties, once the National Assembly was convened and martial law was lifted, it was apparent that political parties would be reactivated. Ayub therefore formed his own party, the Convention Muslim League, but the country's political life and its troubles were little different from the days before martial law. Ayub Khan won another formal term as President of Pakistan in January 1965, albeit in an election in which only the Basic Democrats cast ballots. Opposed by Fatima Jinnah, the sister of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who ran on a combined opposition party's ticket. The contest was closer than expected. During the election campaign, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who as foreign minister was supposedly a loyal member of the Ayub Khan cabinet, promised in a public address that the conflict over Kashmir would be resolved during Ayub Khan's presidency. Bhutto indicated that Kashmir would be released from Indian occupation by negotiation or, if that failed, by armed force, but there was little indication that Ayub Khan had sanctioned Bhutto's pronouncement. Nevertheless, the foreign minister's speech appeared to be both solace to the pro-Kashmiri interests in West Pakistan and a green light to the Pakistan Army to begin making plans for a campaign in the disputed region. A new war over Kashmir was not long in coming. Skirmishes between Indian and Pakistani forces on the line of control between the two administrated portions of the region increased in the summer of 1965, and by September major hostilities had erupted between the two neighbors. Indian strategy confounded Pakistani plans, as New Delhi ordered its forces to strike all along the border between India and West Pakistan and to launch air raids against East Pakistan and even threatened to invade the East. Pakistan's military stores soon were exhausted, a situation made worse by an American-imposed arms embargo on both states that affected Pakistan much more than India. Ayub Khan had to consider halting the hostilities. Ultimately, Ayub Khan was forced to accept a United Nations-sponsored ceasefire and to give up Pakistan's quest for resolving the Kashmir problem by force of arms. Embarrassed and humiliated, Ayub Khan saw all his efforts at building a new Pakistan dashed in one failed venture. And he was compelled to attend a peace conference with the Indian Prime Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, in Tashkent, in Soviet Uzbekistan. There the two leaders were unable to reach a satisfactory agreement of their own making, and their hosts compelled them to sign a draft prepared for them. At that juncture, Bhutto, who had accompanied Ayub Khan to the conference, indicated a desire to separate himself from his mentor. Ayub Khan's popularity had reached its lowest level. And, in the Pakistani game of zero-sum politics, Bhutto anticipated gaining what the president had lost. Pressed by Ayub Khan, Bhutto held up his resignation, but soon thereafter he broke with the president, joined his voice to the opposition, and in due course organized his own political party, the Pakistan People's Party (PPP). Ayub Khan was never the same after signing the Tashkent Agreement. Confronted by rising opposition that was now led by Bhutto in West Pakistan and Mujibur Rahman in East Pakistan, Ayub Khan struck back by arresting both men. Acknowledging that he could not manage the country without a modicum of cooperation from the politicians, Ayub Khan summoned a conference of opposition leaders and withdrew the state of emergency under which Pakistan had been governed since 1965. These concessions, however, failed to conciliate the opposition, and in February 1969 Ayub announced that he would not contest the presidential election scheduled for 1970. In the meantime, protests mounted in the streets, and strikes paralyzed the economy. Sparked by grievances that could not be contained, especially in East Pakistan, the disorder spread to the western province, and all attempts to restore tranquility proved futile. One theme sustained the demonstrators. Ayub Khan had remained in power too long, and it was time for him to go. In March 1969, Ayub Khan announced his retirement and named General Agha Muhammad Yahya Khan to succeed him as president. Once again the country was placed under martial law. Yahya Khan, like Ayub Khan before him, assumed the role of chief martial law administrator. In accepting the responsibility for leading the country, Yahya Khan Saida would govern Pakistan only until the national election in 1970. Yahya Khan abolished Ayub Khan's basic democracy system and abrogated the 1962 constitution. He also issued a legal framework order, LFO, that broke up the single unit of West Pakistan and reconstituted the original four provinces of Pakistan, i.e., Punjab, Sindh, Northwest Frontier Province, and Baluchistan. The 1970 election therefore was not only meant to restore parliamentary government to the country, It was also intended to re-establish the provincial political systems. The major dilemma in the LFO, however, was that in breaking up the one-unit system, the distribution of seats in the National Assembly would be apportioned among the provinces on the basis of population. This meant that East Pakistan, with its larger population, would be allotted more seats than all the provinces of West Pakistan combined.